Well, welcome back to 502 Co-Designing the Future. I'm Katina Michael. I'm from Arizona State University, and we're in week 3 of the Discover stage of Co-Designing the Future. I'm with the Chief Platform Officer of GreaterThanX, Mathew Mytka, and he's also the co-founder of Greater Than Learning. Great to be with you, Mathew.
Yeah, thanks for asking me to join, Katina. I'm excited about being able to explore some of these themes and topics, and ideally provide the students with some thought-provoking ideas and examples and ways that they can go about achieving the things that are important to them and their stakeholders that they're interested in supporting.
Well, Mathew, they've heard of you already because you're the mastermind behind a lot of the instructional design to this course. You gave up a lot of your time to help us out in just sitting there and literally mapping it out for us, this beautiful mural map that you provided in how we would lay out the course. And although the course has matured since our initial meanderings, it was your impetus that really got us to this point and really helped crystallize a lot of my own thinking. So thank you.
Welcome, and all there to, I guess, really help the students ultimately. It's, so it was a co-design process with us too, or a pair design process.
It was. And I kept thinking of that actually later, particularly the exposure to Mural, the sort of templating Canvas software. I'm very appreciative. Now the students have access to these company templates and frameworks to work with. And so I appreciate that exposure.
Awesome. I'm sure they'll get a lot of value out of it. So yeah, excited that outcome, just that was worth it.
Thank you so much. And today we're going to be looking at continual discovery in co-design and key challenges. That's the theme of the first of 3 short videos we'll be doing. And I want to start with the question: how can we think of co-design as a continual discovery process with stakeholders?
Yeah, I guess there's the answer is kind of in the framing of that question. Continual, there's a concept in like product development called Perpetual Beta, that you should never leave the beta process, because the beta process is generally where you're trying to optimize for learning as much as possible about how your product, service, your solution solves the problem for the people that it's meant to. So that kind of mindset, I guess, helps you to go, okay, yeah, we never leave beta, because we're always kind of testing and iterating and learning about what's actually going to help people the most. So thinking about it like that, I think, is a really important process. There's lots of challenges that come with this, and the idea of discovery, you're discovering and sometimes uncovering a whole bunch of things that are relevant to your stakeholders, be that if you're developing a physical product, packaging, thinking about how's this actually solved, what's the context used when someone's washing their hair with this new shampoo that I want to develop. Yeah, there's context. People are generally in the shower, but maybe you're thinking about where they grab it from and materials you use and how they think about it. And so how you design continual engagement with your stakeholders, I guess, is one of the crucial parts. And it's kind of like you're thinking about how you do that from the outset. And a lot of digital products, be that, ones developed by Fortune 500 companies or ones from, Unilever, what have you, they don't always design good mechanisms for the end users to actually interact and provide feedback. Even Apple's mechanisms are crap, and this is, you're talking like, one of the top 10 market cap companies in the world. So always thinking about how do we make it easy for our stakeholders, be that the end users as customers or members of a community or clients in a service provider relationship in an indigenous kind of community. How do we make it easy for them to design the interaction, this product or service or solution, and give us feedback on whether it's actually helping them. Because ultimately, I guess there's questions that you look to answer, quantitative data that you might look to gather, and there's a kind of a way to think about this that I might actually just bring up something so people can see this, because this is actually an important point.
I'll just make sure your sharing is enabled.
Let me, enable the sharing. Rather than me trying to visually explain it, it might actually, and this is kind of about research methods to some degree, but ultimately this is a little bit about like what's the techniques that you can use based on the types of questions you need to get answered.
Yes.
So at the start of the process, you're trying to understand, here's all my assumptions about how someone might use something, and you've got a set of questions or hypotheses about what you think happens or doesn't happen. So let me just bring this up.
While you're doing that, I'll share a typical story. I mean, someone wants to co-design with the Indigenous community and assume they have an internet access capability, and it's like, I'm asking them how they feel about this, about the internet, and then, the biggest stupidity is, but some of them don't have access. So how are they going to tell you about their internet usage, their internet, broadband capacity, blah, 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 when they don't even have access to the internet? So I think you raised some really amazing points before you show us your examples.
Yeah, let's just bring this up. All right, it should work. Assuming you be able to see this now. So
yes,
this is not mine. This is from Christian Rowe, who works he's a designer, from looking at things from a methodology point of view in user experience. But this is really important when you're looking at, okay, what people do, this is on the behavioral side, how you actually go about getting that data and learning when you have, well, what are these people actually doing? There's different methods that you can use it to do that type of research. On the left-hand side with why and how to fix a problem, this is, when you've learned to understand what's the problem that we're trying to actually solve for people, be that, in domestic violence and privacy and challenges around that, or in an environmental context where it's extremely complex because you've got lots of different stakeholders. These are generally externalities that are put on governments to fix versus trying to actually design those things into products. So there's that side, what people say on the attitudinal, and then how many type questions, which is on the quantitative side, and indirect. So I'll just flip over to some of the methods that you can use in this context. So everything from, digital products, eye tracking, and sometimes that's even used in shopping centers where they're trying to maybe understand where people's eyes are going at different shelves and how long it takes them to delay before they actually reach for something. So you've got eye tracking, usability things done in the lab, and again, thinking about this in terms of what people do. This is the behavioral side. And doing that in the lab is something that needs to be done, but also kind of in the field where you're starting to get into contextual inquiry or ethnographic style types of research. So I'm happy to kind of provide this, and the students can kind of look at this as a resource. It's not ours. This is kind of copyrighted by Christian Rowe, but I'm happy to provide this. So these are really important things. Over this side, surveys and getting that quantitative data. If it's a digital product, you've obviously got like analytics tools and things like that, be that SDKs in a software product or websites and using analytics tools on that side. So thought this was relevant
It is, Matt. It is, because their assignment for 502 is to conduct an interview with a primary stakeholder. Yep. And I'm encouraging students to choose an end user, so a citizen in many cases of the public interest projects. And so highly qualitative. And at discover stage, we know that the outcomes of that single interview will be a single transcription, not really generalizable, just one perspective. But as they move to their applied project, we're going to do more qualitative work in focus groups. So you get a bigger sample size of maybe 6 people in each of the focus groups that they run, and maybe 3 focus groups. But we're getting to that understanding of, here, you've got a full transcript, like 14 pages in an hour of a discussion. What questions, how do you do your interview protocol? How do you move from that full transcription to the next stage, which I can see here in your framework of the research methods being incredibly relevant when the students get to see this whole plethora of research methods. So this is a key, I think, diagram. But a question to you, let's just say you were doing interviews, Mathew. How many times, or how many interviews, and I know it's context dependent, but how many touch points, when you're doing CoDesign, how many touch points are there maybe in a short-term project?
Yeah, that's again, sample size, is important, and you've got to work within the constraints that you have when you're engaged in any kind of research design, like designing a research program to actually execute. So it varies. Like we did some work with Data 61 here, which is the digital sidearm of the CSIRO, which is like Australia's research and development kind of organization. And that was on the consumer data right, and I was looking at this new information sharing ecosystem where people are sharing their banking data with banks and making it easy to switch and things like that. And we had 20 participants in a cohort. Obviously, I wouldn't be expecting the students to line up 20 interviews because they are time consuming. Even just the logistics of scheduling becomes like very time consuming. So it varies. It really depends on what type of questions you're looking to ask. If focus groups are beneficial, but again, like just here, those focus groups generally, this is all attitudinal. We like to kind of blend participatory design with like a hybrid approach that we use a lot, which is we're trying to simulate the situation in which people are engaging in like some activity, and understand like what happens in that context, what behaviors are they engaging in, and where are some of the problems, these pain points or gains that they're looking for, that we can start getting at. So we might ask people when they, you frame a scenario, it's kind of like an imaginary scenario so people can imagine themselves like entering a product, be that online or, it's example for a physical product might be, or a service type offering is, you've just broken up with your partner and you've come forward and started talking to a counselor about some of the violence and manipulation that was in your relationship. Very sensitive areas when you're getting into that. So you have to spend a lot of time thinking about, some of the complexities, the emotions that it brings up, how you're going to support someone in an interview, particularly in those sensitive areas. But you try and describe so they can evoke their emotions and try and put themselves into that situation. Now, this is kind of, I guess, still attitudinal. It's stated, people having to draw on and imagine themselves into it, but it's better than just the attitudinal sometimes. So you start, when I flip back to this, you're getting into the what people do, and the why and how to fix it. So you're kind of blending different methods for research into one to try and answer questions that are really important.
Can I just say, I think the separation that you make there between perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors, there's like 3 tiers. Like, oh, I perceive this, but my attitude may be with a scenario tweaked, and then with my actual behavior may be different. It's like those people who say, oh, I'm very privacy, and then they open their wallet and their wallet is full of loyalty card schemes, right? Well, the behavior shows that they're willing to give over some information for something, right? The price of their privacy, or the cost of their privacy, there is a trade-off. But I love that you've exposed our students to perceptions, attitudes, and behavior. What do they do? And I love this crossbar. I love that sheet on the research methods, because perhaps as they go towards their PhD, you know, in this 502, they'll do maybe like the one single interview, it's my perception or whatever. Then they'll move into the applied project where it's more attitudinal, focus group scenarios and just getting a bit more. And then hopefully by the time they finish and they're thinking about a PhD proposal, they'll be doing, now what do the actual users, now how do they behave?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so the terms for those are like stated preference versus revealed preference.
Ooh, yes.
And you know, if you think someone in a focus group, you know, there's different dynamics at play in focus groups, which you have to take into account. There's biases in most research, because a lot of the time a research participant is aiming almost to please the researcher. So that attitudinal data that comes out of it needs, you know, the confidence you have with any insights need to be weighted accordingly. Versus the revealed preference, put someone into a situation where there's, you know, reasonably tangible outcomes and risks that they're trading off on, and see what they do. You know, and that reveals what their preferences actually are versus what they'll state. And a lot of the times there's a difference between what they say they do and what they actually do. A little bit like organizations, when organizations have all these amazing values and principles up on their sites, and they say we're going to, you know, have privacy baked into our WhatsApp product, but what they actually do is very different.
Okay. Key challenges with CoDesign, Mathew Mytka. Is it true that it's like really expensive to actually conduct a real CoDesign project?
It's time consuming. So expensive in terms of effort, it can be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive. A lot of this is about, like I said at the start, thinking about how you bake this into your process rather than thinking about it like in the product. So it can be very expensive if you're a large company, Fortune 100, Fortune 5000, Fortune 500 company. You know, you might devote millions and millions of dollars just to research in like a new product line or something. Because one thing to factor in, as soon as you start looking to engage more with your stakeholders, be that like end users of a product or service, or stakeholders in terms of advocacy groups, consumer advocacy groups, digital rights advocacy groups, domestic violence advocacy groups, environmental advocacy groups, regulators, policy think tanks. You know, you want to engage a lot of diverse stakeholders to be able to kind of understand it from a system level rather than just from a discrete kind of product solution level. There's a lot of friction. And friction costs money. You know, communications back and forth, getting on the same page, different language and terms being used. So it's very time consuming. So there's a lot of energy that's devoted to taking a participatory or co-design approach. So collaboration is friction is a good way to think about it. However, collaboration is necessary to be able to actually design for the needs of the stakeholders. So you kind of have to look at it. A lot of this comes down to, well, how do you have coordination of that collaboration done effectively? So thinking through logistics and timing and sequence and mechanisms for engaging, you start becoming really, really important. So is it costly? It depends. For the students engaging in this, it doesn't necessarily have to be, because you're trying to learn about the process and the methods and the approaches, rather than doing this in a direct commercial sense in any way where you've got funding and resources and cross-functional teams and timelines. Is so very different. So, you know, if you're interviewing 5 people, you're combining that 5 people interview or 2 people interview even with like a session where you get those 2 people into like a mural, a virtual whiteboard tool, and start going, okay, it's something like here, example, if we were trying to make your life, make it easier for you to focus on your mental well-being on a daily basis, and you could just press a button to do it, what would that button do? You know, and that's a simple framing exercise that you could do with those two people, which you did interviews with, and get them to start exploring, well, what is this? Because they're starting to talk about the solution that they're looking for. You know, and in that process, you start revealing a whole bunch of these things. So that's cost effective. The other cost that comes into this is like how you incentivize participation in research, which is always a consideration in a lot of commercial research, is paying participants. Again, that brings up bias. Like I said, if someone's being paid to give you feedback on something, they're generally wanting to make sure that they get their money. They get their money anyway, but these are considerations on the research participant side, and that does create bias in any research project. So the question is, it depends, but there's all those things that you got to factor in.
So I love that you've just listed a lot of key challenges to the co-design approach. Lastly, how might some of these challenges be overcome?
Yeah, get that, and that's a good question. Start small. You know, think big. Start. You know, build tiny. Start tiny is kind of, you know, a really good principle to keep in mind with a lot of this work. So, like I said, how might some of these challenges be overcome? For instance, how do you design a continual discovery co-design process into your product or service? Start with something simple. It's like, okay, we're going to send like a weekly email to people that are involved in this with a survey, you know, a 3-question survey once a month or once a week, right? Now that's something tiny. You're not going to get a huge amount from it, but you're going to learn. You're going to learn enough to be able to then make the next iteration. So that's like the key way to overcome some of the challenges, is don't lose focus of the bigger picture that for one is probably motivating for you as a designer, entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, whatever it may be. But start tiny. What's the smallest possible increment of value that can help you learn? If you design that into your process, you're generally going to be able to overcome a lot of the challenges. They'll still always be there, but like life, you get challenges that never end until, I guess, you're faced with the challenge of pondering your existence on your deathbed. Well, it's morbid. It was a little bit morbid, but
no, it's not. I reckon, Mathew Mytka, that's been 20 minutes with you on Discover, and I love that you've given up of your time. You've actually done what we call public interest engineering to some point. You know, not public interest law, public interest journalism, but public interest engineering, where you're volunteering of your time. I mean, your insights would usually cost somebody about $1,000 to get educated on just in that 20 minutes. I appreciate everything you've given us today, and I look forward to the next 2 videos with you this afternoon.
Fantastic. Thanks, Katina, and thanks to the students for whoever's watching.